Good evening. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you to those who have joined the party, and I hope I can persuade you if you haven't. I'm very interested as to why people who haven't joined the party have come along, and why. Do you mind if I ask? Anyone willing to volunteer who isn't a member, why you came along this evening? That is as good a reason as any. Okay. I don't think I'm going to get an answer to that one, so I'll... Yeah, thank you.
I came along because my son started to really start to educate me in politics. He's quite passionate. We've got two young grandchildren and worried about their future.
How do you see their future? What about their future are you worried about?
Well, I don't like the fact that we seem to be getting our democratic vote, or not vote completely, but our right to have a voice.
And you think that's disappearing?
I think that's disappearing.
Yeah, it is. It is, through a variety of measures, mostly through the European Union. Though it can't all be blamed on the European Union. It's the direction that the Western world's been heading for the last 5 or 6 decades, since the end of World War II, really. I think, if you listen to my talks, you might have heard me say this before. But I think a lot of this happened after World War II, when the UN and the beginnings of the European Union were founded. You had this anti-nationalism fervour spreading the world because they blamed nationalism for World War II, because Hitler was a nationalist. They blamed it on nationalism. I think, of course, that was wrong. I agree with Margaret Thatcher, not for the only time, but certainly not every time. And she said that it wasn't nationalism that caused World War II, it was appeasement that caused it. And she was right. And the problem we have at the moment is that we are facing a very real totalitarianism, a very, very real totalitarianism. And instead of acknowledging it and opposing it, as we did the Nazis, we are appeasing it, not only abroad, but here in Britain as well. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. But I think when you say that you're worried about the future for your grandchildren, it's the most common thing I hear. It's the most common thing I hear. People are worried. And they're worried because the Britain they know, the Britain we know of certainly 20 years ago, but even 10 years ago is vastly different from what it was even 10 years ago. In terms of how people feel, you can feel it when you are outside. When you're out, in pubs and restaurants, you can feel a tension among people. And when you talk to people about anything, people don't want to talk about politics. They certainly don't want to talk about religion. There's an unease that wasn't there 10 years ago, and that wasn't there 20 years ago. And we need to get that back. But I think what people are fearing most of all when they say they fear for the future of their grandchildren or even their children is simply that the Britain they know won't be there. And they don't know what's coming. They don't know what's going to replace the Britain they know, but they know something is, because they know that country they knew is disappearing. And it's the most common thing I hear, but they don't want a really horrible response to it either. They don't want racism, they don't want fascism, they don't want Nazism, they just want someone who is tough, yes, on this question, tough on the immigration question, tough on the Islam question, but who also isn't a crazy, real hard right. And that's what people are missing now. And I think if we as a party can provide it, and I think we can, I think it's our role. And I think as well as being an opposition to the mass immigration and an opposition to the Islamization, because that's what it is. People dismiss that word as right-wing nut job, but it's not. It's a perfectly reasonable word to use. We have to provide a buffer against that and against the real hard right, the real nasty racist types that will rise if we are not listened to. And that's one of the roles that we have to fulfill. Another role we have to fulfill is the anti-EU role. Where's that gone? Where's that gone? I don't hear much opposition to the EU. We should be hearing it, and not just talks about, and again, if you listen to my talks, you'll hear me say this again. I try not to say the same stuff over and over again, but it's hard not to because you have to make the same point. But I talk about this frequently. It's not enough to talk about trade deals and how we can't make trade deals with this country and how if we have Brexit, we can make trade deals. And the problem is, people, a great deal of people, when they hear politicians talking about trade and about economics, they switch off. They do. And we all know how vital it is. The economy, I insist, for example, on a separate policy for the economy because without money we can't pay for any of the other policies we have. So the economy is fundamentally important. But for the electorate, it's not everything. And if it was, they probably wouldn't have voted to leave the EU in the first place. So I think that the discussion we're having about the EU now is flawed. We shouldn't be talking only about trade deals because people switch off. What we should talk about is that that Brexit's not enough. We need an end to the European Union altogether. Only then will we actually be free of the European Union. We all know what's going to happen, don't we? We all know what's going to happen. We're going to get to a date in 2019. It'll be Brexit Day. We will officially have left the European Union. And if they can wriggle it well enough, we'll be even worse off than we were in it. And that'll be our lesson. And that'll be the lesson to all the other countries in Europe. We will still have an open door to migration from all over the European Union. That's a given. That's a given. No matter what deal they come up with, I guarantee you freedom of movement will be in it. That is what they're after. That's what Labour is after. That's what the EU is after. That's what the globalist elite is after. And globalism is not a conspiracy either. It's an ideology, which is two very different things. A conspiracy happens behind, out of view. People are shady and lying about things and covering things up. This is happening in plain sight. This is an ideology. It's a globalist ideology. It's to take down the nation state, especially the Western nation state, because that's the rich one, that's the powerful one. They're the ones that have to be dismantled. It's largely about communism, but in any case, the European Union does not like dissent, and it's built into its DNA that it shouldn't be disobeyed. It is built into its DNA. It's built into its DNA that it must remove the European nation state. It was designed from the get-go to remove the nation state. And the reason you remove the nation state is the same reason that I am pro-nation state, is that it's the only practicable way of having accountable government, in my mind. I don't see how supranational or massive land masses with different regions or different languages, I don't see how they work. I don't see how, for example, a one-world government would work. I think people would... I think people, even in a massive landmass, even within a global country, say, a global equivalent, or if the world was a country, I think people would naturally break off and form their own regions and their own districts and self-government of those regions would naturally occur. Because that's what we do. And that's why I believe in the nation state. It's a way of, it has to be containable, it has to be practicable, it has to have borders. It has to have borders and citizenship because of the vote, primarily. Because if you don't have citizenship, then anyone can vote, and if you don't have a border, anyone can vote, and then you have chaos, which is exactly what we have now. Exactly what we have now. People are coming into this country and voting. We have their names because they're getting a polling card, but who do they have? Only British citizens are supposed to vote in a general election. Are they British citizens? I doubt it. Our students are voting twice. We all know, perfectly legally, we all know about the police going to polling stations in certain parts of East London, for example, during election day, because of voter fraud. And it's going on across the board. So we have immense problems to deal with. But you must have this nation state, I would argue, with a common identity, common language, a law of the land which must cover all of the law of the land, and if it doesn't, then that you have constitutional, jurisdictional questions, and we have those as well. And we have those as well now because we're in a multicultural country. and multiculturalism has meant in practice that the police, for a start, the police are investigating crimes based largely on the ethnicity of the complainant and the ethnicity of the suspect. And the police are making political considerations when deciding whether or not to investigate or prosecute crimes. That happened quite obviously and quite openly in the 80s, and late 80s and early 90s, when the BNP was gaining traction. And they were talking about the grooming gangs. And the police knew full well about these grooming gangs, but suppressed it, covered it up so that the BNP would not be right. And that was their concern. Their concern was that if we make this known, then the public will agree with the BNP. They'll know that the BNP was saying something that was true. And we can't have that. Now, I don't... ex-BNP members are welcome in For Britain, but I don't have a great deal of time, for example, for a party that doesn't allow black people to join. So let's be honest about this stuff. But they were right about this. No matter how wrong they might be about some things, they're right about this. And the truth is the truth, no matter who tells it. But the police were so concerned with politics that they covered up a serious crime, and widespread serious crime, so that a certain political party wouldn't gain support. The police should have no concern whatsoever as to who votes, or how they vote, or why they vote. The police should be enforcing criminal law only. So we have immense problems. And law and order is only one of them. Education is another. And this is the future of the country. If you are worried about your grandchildren's future, where we have to make change is in the schools, and soon. Because the schooling is where it starts. The schooling is where the anti-British, globalist, UN kind of rhetoric begins. All refugees are angels. If you don't agree to give refuge to half the world, then you're a Nazi and a fascist and a bad person, basically, to a small child. And I mean it when I say small children. I have only anecdotal evidence of this because people write to me about this. But so many times I've heard, for example, after Trump was elected, as teachers telling kids in schools that Trump was a racist and a woman hater, and encouraging it. And somebody who's, I think about 14 or 15-year-old, was in a class, had said in the class, this teacher was calling Trump all these names, and the kids were putting up their hands to say things, and they were all saying what they were expected to say. Except this one kid who said, oh, well, look, but at least he's doing what he said he was going to do. And this kid has had a really tough time at school since. You know, this is serious stuff. This is really serious stuff. It's almost like, I say this a lot, it's almost like a science fiction movie, isn't it? Where you have these obvious lies, and obvious bias, and obvious prejudice, and obvious propaganda. And those of us who are awake or alert or in any way sane can see this. And you think, well, it's 1984. It's 1984. Education is where it starts. I think we have to take the extreme left out of the classroom. And if you look at the National Union of Teachers, even they, if you look at their website, some of the things on there, you think, this has got nothing to do with it. They're pro-Palestinian, and which probably give you an idea of the kind of left we're talking about. There's lots of pro-Palestinian stuff on there. And if you go into some of the motions that they've passed, they've passed a motion saying they would not teach British values to children, despite the government requirement that they do, because it was a mark of British imperialism. And instead they would teach international values. This is the stuff, this is the biggest teachers' union in the country. This is the kind of thing that's written on their website. And this is who's teaching children across this country. And there's a rhetoric, there's an anti-Western, pro-multicultural, and multiculturalism itself is a denigration of the mainstream culture. It is. It tells people, at least it tells people, that their culture is no better than anyone else's. And at worst, it tells people that their culture is equal to, if not worse than, which is frequently what's hinted at, cultures which are patently and objectively crueler, less free, less civilized, and yet we're led to believe not only is our culture not better than these cultures, but it's actually worse. There's something noble about mutilating your daughter's genitals if you happen to be from Somalia and you happen to be from an oppressed culture. This is the kind of stuff kids are learning at school, and it carries on right the way through university, and that's a reason I want us to get into schools. So if there is anyone in the room, or if you know of anyone who could possibly help us to either get a speaking spot in a school or a university, I'd be very grateful. I've spoken in schools and on universities back before I was designated far right by the media. But again, education, massive issue for us, has to be a massive priority. National Health Service is another one. Politically speaking, it's in the top 3, top 5 for most people, I think, in this country when they consider how they will vote. And I want us to be something that is missing in the array of political parties in this country. Something that is a party that is clear on the NHS. People are confused, I think, about the positions of the big parties on the NHS. Labour presents itself as the party of the NHS because, to be fair, it did create the NHS. But it also created PFIs that have put hospitals into debt to the tune of billions. It also brought Richard Branson into the health service, taking a nice profit out of it, and others. And yet Labour presents itself as this. The Tories, we know, have met. Well, I mean, they made this massive change to the health service when they came into coalition government with the Lib Dems. They put into place this massive transition. And in some ways it improved. It improved some areas, I think, administratively at least. But you had this couple of years of chaos where people who were earning 6 figures were getting massive redundancy packages and then being rehired on 6 figures again. So the whole thing has been a mess for a long time. I think if any political party can get the message just right on the NHS, they can get a massive, massive vote out there. And I think the just right message has to be that, yes, it will stay free. That's message number 1. Yes, it will stay free. Message number 2 is that we will make it more efficient, and we actually will. And we'll do that by getting rid of some of the many layers of management and bureaucracy that is in the health service. Let's do an audit of NHS management. I think it would find some interesting things. And I'd bring that into the wider public sector. I think part of the problem with the public sector, and I believe in the free market, and this is the sort of economic vision which again is different from any that I've heard from a political party, because it's clear we believe in the free market, but we also believe in a low-tax, efficient public sector. And we believe in a low-tax, efficient public sector run by the public, for the public. I don't think there's anything socialist or communist about it. What it is saying that if it's the taxpayer's pound being used, then the taxpayer should be the priority. And I think for that reason that we should make the public sector accountable financially to the public. And I mean by means of something tangible. Some body, a body not made up of politicians, but of informed and active local people to sack those who run their hospitals into the ground, or these chief constables who allow crime to go on across their towns and do nothing about it. I think the people need to sack them. I want to see them sacked. I think most of us want to see them sacked, but I want to see them sacked by the local people. I think that part is very important, and I want local people to be able to remove them. I think, who has actually been punished for Rotherham? Nobody. There are still people sitting in 6-figure salaries who were around during Rotherham, during when the story broke. And I think there's only one police and crime commissioner who's actually lost their job in this entire affair. That wouldn't be the case if they were accountable. It just wouldn't be. If the people had any say, I read a story the other day and I sent it out on Twitter. I was just so stunned. And it's one of many examples like this that I hear. At the NHS paying £3,000 and something to Boots for a mouthwash that costs £93. The NHS is paying £3,000+ for a mouthwash that costs £93. You'll see it time and time again. Local government paying hundreds or even thousands of pounds for a mattress that will cost £100. You see it time and time again. If the people had any real, and it's not good enough, the local elections are not good enough. There has to be, the chief executives of these places are not elected, so they're not held to account at all. So we have to change that. And if we could have if this stuff was known by people, if they knew that the NHS was paying £3,000 and a bit for a £93 mouthwash, don't you think something would change? Don't you think people would think, we can't, this is absurd. Think about the difference in money that is. Think about the differences you could make if that money was spent more wisely. The money the public sector is spending on nonsense, it infuriates. It infuriates. And people rarely hear about it because the press doesn't talk about it, because the press is happy with the status quo. And again, it's not a conspiracy, it's just an observation of reality. The press, they know each other. The press and the politicians, they know each other. They drink in the same wine bars. It's what they call the Westminster bubble. It's real. It's real. They have no real idea about how people live out in the world that they govern. They live in a world of conferences and press events and strategy and trying to script things properly so that it doesn't upset that person, I've seen it. I've seen them. Absolutely lost touch. And I'm not suggesting they're all bad people. But I think they get so sucked into this political life that they completely forget why they're there. And I don't think that we will. There's something different about For Britain that I really think can work, because it's not coming from this career politician angle. And the time is right. I never wanted to be a politician. I never wanted to be a politician. There's something, I'm here because I'm so frustrated at watching this injustice is too mild a word. I can't, it's so, I don't know what it drives something in me when I hear that £3,000 and a bit is being spent. I think there are people lying in the streets in the rain for want of 50 quid, and we have this £3,000 and a bit for a 93. This is the importance of it. And I know most decent people in this country agree with me. I know they do. And I know because I talk to people. It's just common sense. You get decent. People are decent. And they really knew the obscene waste that these career politicians are indulging. And the arrogance they indulge in as well. As you might know, I'm standing at Lewisham in London at the moment in a parliamentary by-election. And I see what happens there as well. The absolute child poverty seems to be rising year on year. This is a borough in one of the richest cities in the world. Educational attainment is shocking. Only 28% or 28% of people have no qualifications. Homelessness is up, and all these crime is up. I think violent crime reports were up 67% in a few years, and the place has been dominated by Labour for years and years and years, and it just reflects the rest of the Labour-dominated parts of this country. They never get any better. They never get any better. You look at the Labour-dominated areas; are always areas that have poverty problems. They're always areas with high crime rates. If you look at the grooming, I keep being told to call it the child rape. What was child rape scandal? I was going to say, but it's not a scandal. It's way worse than that. But the child rape, the grooming gangs that have been going on, largely Labour areas again. The council's involved in covering it up, or allegedly involved in covering it up. Labour areas again, you can't help but wonder if it isn't Labour keeping these places poor in order to keep being elected. And you can't help but wonder that if when people leave, when white Britons leave Labour areas and move out to part of white flight or otherwise, that Labour needs mass immigration to keep buying its votes. And it's been buying votes with benefits for a long time. I think a lot of people vote Labour because they're afraid of losing their benefits. So Labour encourages this state dependency, this low self-esteem culture, this low individuality, socialist kind of culture. And they absolutely take the electorate for granted. They don't think they need to bother, and so they don't bother. You won't see much effort from Labour in Lewisham East in this by-election because they don't need to bother. So cushy are they that Labour, when it selects its candidate for seats like this, it doesn't select a candidate, it selects an MP. Because it knows, and therefore you're getting MPs based on the Parliamentary Labour Party's preferences rather than the public's preferences. But it's our fault. It's our fault. They're manipulating, they're using the system to put who they want in Parliament. It's not about contesting seats for Parliament, it's putting who they want in Parliament. And we're letting them do it because we keep voting for them. It's as simple as that. But we keep voting for them because we keep being lied to. I do believe if people knew just common sense realities, just the realities of what goes on around them, the way local governments are run, for example, the way the money is spent. If people were aware of this every day, if it was on the metro when they're getting the bus home, if they were aware of this, things would be different. I do think things would be different. We also need to break habit. There's a great deal of habit in voting in this country. We need to break it. People vote Labour or Tory by habit. If anyone, I've no... Persistence is always the key to everything. But if anyone has any clear, clever ideas on how to break a large number of people's voting habits, I'd love to hear them. But we have several things, we have several obstacles if we really want to break, and Labour is the target, as far as I'm concerned. It's an ambitious goal, of course it is. But if I didn't believe in this, I wouldn't be here. It's definitely not easy, and you have to have a lot of faith, and you have to have a lot of optimism to believe you can make a serious dent in one of the only two parties capable of governing the country. But I do. And it's not because of me, it's not because I'm the Messiah, it's because the message is right. And if we can get the right people, if we can get people mobilised, if we can get people out there, the time is now. I really do believe that, the time is now. People are very, very tired of political correctness. Not that because they want to be nasty, sexist or racist, but this is not what this is about. That's not, politeness is not political correctness. Political correctness is shutting people down because their opinion does not suit you. And that's exactly what it is. Objections to all sorts of things, like gay marriage or the teaching transgenderism to children. People have every right to object to these things without losing their job or even coming close to losing their jobs. It doesn't matter who's offended. It is your right to object. It is your right to object. It is your right to object. So that's not, political correctness is not about being polite. It is a political oppression. It comes out of the Soviet era. People are also tired of fake, polished, managed politicians. They really are. They really are. They're tired of hearing something they know has been rehearsed 100 times in front of a mirror or elsewhere. They're tired of hearing sound bites. And they're tired of being told that what they see with their very own eyes isn't happening. We can see, let me give you an example. This is Orwellian stuff. I've got a book coming out very soon called Beyond Terror. And this is exactly the kind of things I talk about in it. I have a chapter called 1984, where I talk about how we are living in that Orwellian nightmare. And this is one of them. We're told, you know, in 1984, the party told the people, it rewrote history every day and told the people what reality was. And, you know, 2 and 2 is 5. And, of course, the main character, Winston, continues to insist that it's 4, which is why his life is miserable. But you have, after the Cologne attacks, for example, the European, this was something that I had never heard of happening in Germany before. I'm 40 years old, I'd never heard of this happening in Germany before. A gang of thousands, just think of how many people that is, surrounding Cologne Square, and I've been to Cologne Square, it's not that big, and assaulting mostly women, but men as well, sexually assaulting women. Women were raped, some women were gang raped. On this square, the following morning, the German press reported, or the local Cologne press reported, that all had been peaceful the night before. Then when it started to break over the next couple of days, what had happened? Now, first of all, can you imagine, we talk a lot about feelings, don't we? The left likes to talk about feelings. Well, let's spare a minute to think about the feelings of a woman who was gang raped in Cologne and who read the next day that it was largely peaceful. I imagine how she must have felt. But that aside, when it started to break, the European Union and the German leaders immediately started to say that it had nothing to do with the migrants that had crossed into Germany's borders over the year prior. It was all migrants. And yet it had nothing to do with migrants. This is what we were told. This is 1984. We can see that these crimes were committed by migrants. They weren't committed by Germans. It's never happened in Germany before, to my knowledge. Certainly not on that scale. I don't think Taharush is a German tradition. But that's an Arabic word for the mass sexual assault of women. It's got a word. And it was committed in Cologne in Germany, which those of us Islamophobic bigots warned exactly would happen if you open your borders to the Muslim world. But this is the Orwellian world we're living in. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. Okay, well, it did happen, but it had nothing to do with the people who did it. This is what we're hearing. And we get this shocking response as well from the mayor of Cologne at the time, saying that women should keep men at an arm's distance. And there was a code of conduct introduced for women. So we have an Islamic society straight away. Women are assaulted in the street. Women have to change their conduct to match Pakistani, Syrian or Iraqi society. Immediately this is happening. And this is why I said we are living in an Islamization. I won't talk for too much longer because I'll take some questions, but we are living in an Islamization. And this is again, of course, the big controversial topic for Britain. It's both when I talk about it, I'm told you're talking about it too much. When I don't talk about it, I'm told, why aren't you talking about it? It's a difficult thing. On the one hand, it's a major selling point for us as a party. Obviously, that's not why I do it. I've been doing it for years, way before I founded a party. But as a party, it is a major point for us. And partly because people are desperate to talk about this. They're desperate to talk about it. They're desperate to talk about it without political correctness being thrown in their face. So they're desperate to talk about it without every 5 minutes being reminded, but not all Muslims are like, they just want to talk. They also want to express the fear that they feel, and which they're not allowed to do, because fear of Islam is hate, apparently. And it's a great release. It's a great release, but they also want to talk about it in the way they talk about it. I talk about Islam in the way I really think about it. I don't sit down and rehearse things. This is how I really think. This is what I really think about it. What I really think is that it's, regardless of, and I'll make the distinction now just to clarify it, and I won't spend too long on this. The distinction I make is not between Islam and Islamism, which a lot of people do. The distinction I make is between Islam and Muslims. And again, this is not political correctness. I'll explain it clearly. To me, and I think to anyone who looks at this fairly and objectively, Islam has to have a definition. Language means definitions. It has to mean, the word Islam has to have a defined meaning. To me, it is the Quran and Muhammad. That's Islam. And if it's not, then I don't know what is. So to me, the word Islam means the Quran and Muhammad. The word Muslims means people who were born into or who are signed up to the teachings of the Quran and Muhammad. So they are two different things. And the best way to describe it to me is to call Islam the book and Muslims the readers of a book. So the difference between a book and the reader of a book is a difference between Islam and Muslims. I think that Islam, I've read the Quran, I've read many of the hadiths, although I certainly haven't read them all because there are several volumes of them. But I have read the Quran, and I know most of the most used, most acknowledged hadiths, and as well as a few sneaky ones most people don't know. But based on that, based on objective research and objective evidence, I think that it is a politically totalitarian, a very, very violent, a society. It seeks a society and offers governance of a society built upon violence or the threat of violence. All of it is the punishments are extremely violent. And they will tell you that this is, it acts as a deterrent, but this is, even so, even if you're never stoned to death, you still live in a society where the punishment for private life is being stoned to death. So it's not, it's not enough to say, but only a few people are ever actually stoned. It's not enough. You're living in a society where the law says you'll be stoned to death for having sex, which is what it's usually imposed for. We can't live in a society like that. It's cruel, and it's extremely, extremely illiberal. I'm a liberal. I'm a libertarian. I believe in freedom, real freedom. I believe in the freedom of the individual, the rights of the individual, in a democratic state, governed by laws which we have all agreed democratically. The state should enforce those laws and then leave us alone. That's the state I believe in. I think we should be free. But this is one of the major reasons I oppose it, is because it's extremely illiberal. It governs and controls every aspect of your life. I believe it belongs in another century. I don't believe it belongs in either the Western world or in the 21st century. I think we in the West, we in Europe, haven't seen the kind of barbarism that is written into Islam scriptures for hundreds of years. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't want it back either. We don't need another dark age in Europe. I think that, and this is where I'm going to close the politically correct loophole I just opened by making a distinction between Islam and Muslims. It's true, that distinction is true. But I also don't blame Islam for the problems. I blame the Muslims putting Islam into practice. And that's why I argue against, or at least to talk about immigration from Muslim countries. When you'll hear a lot, people say, well, the problem is the ideology, the problem is Islam, the problem's not Muslims. No, sorry, this is a cop-out. The problem is Islam, but Islam wouldn't harm us if Muslims didn't put it into practice. So it would just be a book on the shelf. And so the people doing the beheading and the mutilation and the amputations and the stonings, that's not Islam, that's Muslims putting Islam into practice. So when you have, and here's I'm going to put this straight after Lewisham. I'd meant to have done it by now, so I'm sorry, but I am. Straight after Lewisham, we will be putting out the votes for members to vote on our main policies. We'll have 10 areas. You'll be given 2 options, and one of them is going to be on Muslim immigration. Because according to polls, 47% of this country wants a ban on immigration from Muslim societies. Now that's a strong position to take. And if almost half the country is taking it, then we need to talk about this seriously. And in the meantime, I suggest we come up with an immigration policy that exercises some common sense. And the grooming gangs. Grooming gangs are not by any means exclusively Pakistani. But in the northern heartlands of England, for example, they usually are. So you know that you're going to have more. And we all know that non-Muslims rape, but you also know that you have this phenomenon, this gang phenomenon, which, if you continue mass immigration from the countries that they already come from, you're going to get more of them, right? Right? And more girls are going to be raped, right? I'm not the only one who understands. This is what, people get this. People get this. But can you imagine someone standing in the House of Commons and saying that? It just never, look what happened to Sarah Champion. And she even apologised. She didn't even say anything much, but she even apologised for it. She'd said something about we have a Pakistani rape gang problem. And then apparently it was the headline, and she immediately disowned it and apologised. She's the MP for Rotherham, and the first time she'd said something, she disowns the headline and apologises. But in any case, isn't it time for some common sense? Isn't it time for some common sense? We can't have this. And immigration seems to have gone off the agenda altogether. Is anyone actually talking about immigration in politics today? Other than telling people to come here illegally, as Boris Johnson and Sajid Javid have encouraged people to do. The Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, in a week of each other, both said, one, that we should give an amnesty to illegal migrants. And the second one, within hours of taking control at the Home Office, disagreed with Theresa May and said, no, it should be. And it should be a wonderful environment, not a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. I mean, he made Theresa May look tough on immigration. That's how, in his first few hours in office, he made Theresa May look tough on immigration. That's our Conservative Home Secretary. The option is Diane Abbott. You know, we have a real chance here. We really do. There's an appetite for something. There's an appetite for something. I can feel it. I can really feel it. There's a real change going on. There's a real change going on. People don't trust the media. By the million, people don't trust the media. They actually loathe the mainstream media, in fact. I think people have really turned against the mainstream media. They're turning more and more, not only to the alternative media, but to books and to alternative journals and alternative magazines. I think there's there's something very exciting. Change is waiting to happen, is what I'm trying to say. The change is there, all there has to be someone to step in to that place and be that change. And I honestly do think we can. The message is right. The message is right. People are tired of this. They're tired of it. And they want common sense. People who've had a job in their lives, you know, they're tired of the career politicians. And this is all, it sounds like cliche, but it isn't, it's true. People are tired of career politicians. They're tired of the lies, they're tired of the political correctness, they're tired of being hated in their own country. And we have to channel that, because there's a lot of anger for example, from white people in Europe. There's a lot of anger brewing, I think, and it's getting worse and worse. I very little time today. I only sent out 2 tweets on Twitter today, and both of them, and it wasn't deliberate. It was just articles that caught my eye. Both of them published today. One of them about how cycling is too white in London. Cycling is too white. Well, basically, white people are punished for doing what the government encourages people to do, which is cycle instead of taking the bus. But there you go. Can't do anything right. And it reminds me actually of one of the EU bods. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been Juncker, it might not have been. Saying that Europe was too white. And this is constant. This is constant. You're hearing it all the time. Now, objecting to that does not make you a racist. It doesn't mean you hate anybody. It means you're objecting to an unjust, smearing, constant denigration of a people because of their skin colour. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening. And it's encouraged at every level from the United Nations down. It is, of course, to make Europeans weak, so that we won't defend our countries when they take them from us. But there we're going into... that's more ideology. But I do believe that ideology has taken place. And I'll round this up by going back to where I started, about when I mentioned the transformation, the deliberate transformation of Europe post the Second World War. I think, you know, even if you did think it was a conspiracy, it isn't. Certainly not to me. It's the evidence for it is all there. The intention was to get rid of the Europe that we knew. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And to sort of rid the world of the European nation state. And I think, and I wrote this in my book as well, that if I was going to, regardless of the motivation behind it, regardless of who's behind it or why, or if anyone's behind it, or if it's just organically happening, if I was going to dismantle Europe, I would do what has been happening in Europe for the last 20 years. I would introduce massive, massive immigration from cultures and societies completely at odds with Europeans, what Europeans are used to. And you see this with hygiene habits, you see this even with educational standards. These are enormous, enormous differences between Europeans and many of the people who are coming into Europe by the million. I would also teach schools that the history of Europe is a dark one and a negative one, and European children ought to be ashamed. That's happening. So you have a population that won't defend itself because it doesn't believe in itself. I would push back any nationalist rhetoric, debate flags or whether or not introduce a debate on this is how it's done. You can see this actually happening. I think it's on TV tonight. A program on Channel 4 tonight about Britain's heroes, where people want to take down statues. This is the next phase. And again, I'm not suggesting conspiracy. It's the organic development of this ideology. This is the next phase of it. Taking down, rewriting in many respects British history. But the parts of it that they no longer approve of, or parts of it that wouldn't be socially acceptable today, will be wiped out, or will be demonized. It'll be used as an example as to why Britain isn't worth saving, why Britain has nothing good to offer, and why we shouldn't bother to keep it independent and sovereign. This is the society we're creating is taking us miles and miles away from a sovereign national nation state. It's certainly taking us miles away from the Europe and the Britain that we knew. But I still think it can be saved. I still think there's plenty of time. Well, plenty of time, but there's still time. I believe we're still the vast majority, not just numerically, but I think in terms of our thinking, our common sense, fair, but with respect for ourselves. Thinking is shared by the majority. And for that reason, we have an opportunity to turn it around. We have a couple of decades at most to turn it around. But I think we can, and I think we will. We will try. For those of us who are members in the room, we will certainly try. That's our job. It's a big ask, but it can be done. And for those of you who are not members, then become members, and we'll get it done all the quicker if you do. I shall leave it there and take some questions, but thank you all for listening to me. Thank you.
So I think you're right about the whole thing around change, and there's an undercurrent there. And I talk to my friends and family, and we think and say the same things, and we see the same things. What do you think, Theresa May and Corbyn and co would be saying about for Britain? Would they see it as a threat? Not a threat, but are they feeling that undercurrent the same way that we feel it?
Possibly. They will say, even if they don't personally, they'll have people to do that for them, if you see what I mean. But I think they know it's there, but they're going to try and manage it by pretending it isn't there, by publicly pretending it isn't there. So they're going to pretend that the levels are rising. But they're going to pretend they're not, and they're going to continue to pretend, at least for a while, that it's only a small minority of far-right extremists who are saying and knowing these things. They will keep a lid on that for as long as they can, and pretend that that's the case for as long as they can, even though they know that's not true. And I do think they do know that's not true. But politicians will often want to keep the lid on until they're out of office. And that's a sad truth. I think there are many reasons that politicians are so bad on this issue. It depends on the individual. I think you have individuals who are lefty brainwashed, to put it for want of a better term. who actually believe that a criticism of Islam it can be equated to the persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany, for example. This is it's craziness, but they hear it and they believe it, and it gets applause. You know, it's the kind of person who thinks, well, who gets most applause on Question Time? I'll agree with them. Sadly, a lot of it is based on that and sort of in group, getting accepted by the in group and not really thinking things through. I think there's another group who is simply on Islam's side because Islam is anti-Western and has no scruples or any concern for the harm that would be caused, and it is being caused. I think other people know perfectly well that you and I are right about this, but they've decided for their career's sake to keep it buttoned for now. Others know about it, but think it's safer to keep it buttoned for now. They think an appeasement strategy will work better. That if we started to talk the way I talk, for example, that we would alienate the apparent moderate majority. There's no such thing. So I think it depends on the people, but I think the government does know, or certainly has an idea, that there is something bubbling away here. But they'll contain it as best they can by continuing to demonise. But that won't last for much longer. That you can see that wearing away. The scariness of the word racist has gone. It's not working. And I think, of course, they know that, but they'll contain it as long as they can. But something will happen. And my worry is that what I would like to happen is that we vote for sane people who will bring a bit of common sense and sanity to this, rather than wait another 10 years or 20 years of bloodshed in the streets and guerrilla warfare in the streets between Muslims and non-Muslims, and who knows what other factions will get involved. It could be really dangerous. And then at the end of that, we could end up with some really nasty people. There's a lot at stake. It's a big, big issue, and the people know it. But they'll contain it for as long as they can. And then, if something happens where it can no longer be contained, they will rewrite history and pretend they were saying this all along. That's my prediction.
I'm feeling energised again now with yourself,
Good.
with the party,
I'm very
looking forward to doing things. And let me say to you that there is a lot more feeling on the street now than there was 10 years ago. You quite rightly said that.
I agree.
And that indeed is what it is. But I think everyone in this room is going to need to be aware of personal security.
Yeah. I hope you're being a little bit pessimistic, but you're probably not. I think, certainly for me, to be honest with you, I'm enjoying the last bit of ability I have to get a train by myself. I don't think, success to me of this party is pretty much what I'm putting my life into now. That's what I've devoted my life to. And I do believe it will succeed. And its success will mean a very difficult life for me personally, a very difficult life for other people personally, who I certainly don't want this to be about me, certainly not for much. I want other public faces representing the party as soon as possible. But it's going to be very tough, and it's going to take a lot of sacrifice. But the alternative is so much worse. The alternative is so much worse. People ask me, are you not afraid? I say, yes, I am actually afraid. But I'm less afraid of doing this as I am of what happens if we don't do this. I cannot bear the idea of a British Islamic state. I can't bear. Even I may never see it. I think I will actually. I'm only 40. I'm talking 30 years here. If we keep going in the same trajectory we're going, at the pace we're going, the definition of Islamophobia is going through Parliament. They're going to try and make Islamophobia a criminal offence. This is it. This is it. They're never going to stand up and say, we are now living under Sharia law. Well, maybe they will, but not for a while at least. It'll be, not even by the back door, by the front door. They just won't call it Sharia. But I can't, it's already happening. We're already seeing, halal is imposed, speech restrictions are imposed, the press is afraid, the police are afraid. We're afraid of Islam. We're being dominated by it. Already. So the idea of the future being an Islamic state of Britain, after all people did to build it, and after all people did to fight for it, to just let it become this nightmare. I can't. I'm willing to sacrifice to stop that happening, because this country's given me everything, and I owe it. So this is my way of saying thanks, basically. We all have to realise how lucky we are. I heard someone say this, I can't even remember where now. Do you know when it was? Britain's Got Talent last night. I saw Britain's Got Talent last night. There was a group, women's, the D-Day Darlings. Did anyone see it? Isn't it beautiful? I saw them in the audition as well, singing We'll Meet Again. Absolutely wonderful. And it was mentioned, we forget how lucky we are that this is our country. How lucky. This is the best country in the world. Everyone says that, but in our case, it's true. We're so lucky, but we must fight for it. We must save it. We must save what's great about it and give it to future generations, because other people did it for us.
I don't think people realise that what's actually
going
on.
Don't.
I think you could walk out the street now and start talking to people about Islamification in this country. They think you're from another planet. They really would.
Far too many would, yeah. But I think probably more than you think. Because part of the sort of insight that I've had over the years is that when people ask me, if I meet someone, and you always ask each other, what do you do? And it's led to some interesting conversations, because I've been leading Sharia Watch for a few years, even before UKIP. So I've been campaigning on Islam for years. And it's led to a lot of interesting conversations. And people from all walks of life, when they know they can tell you about it, you'll hear. You'll hear, because people know they can talk to me about this stuff without getting into trouble. So you'll hear. But you're right. There are also, it's probably around half and half. Half of people are, and it probably reflects the figure actually, like the 47%. But the other half have no idea. You're right. You're right, and they will think you're mad.
You're not going to get someone who's lived in a rural lifestyle and explain to them what inner city life is in a ghettoised area. They're just not going to get it, because most people's source as well of information is coming through the propaganda machine, where this stuff just isn't real. It's because they only talk about when they have to.
I think we actually had this discussion. I had this discussion with a few members down in Devon when I was down there recently. And I think bigger picture-wise, people will relate to the nation aspect. But to bring it back to sort of more pragmatism, we want to keep the British countryside intact. And one of the things, obviously, that threatens the British countryside is mass immigration. Because when migrants come into the big cities, so London and Manchester and other areas, people move out. And they move out to the current small towns and villages, which will get bigger. And you will even have migrant populations coming into relatively small towns. So there is something, politically speaking, there's an argument, there's a selling point for us there, is you don't want this to happen. Vote for us and we won't let it. We will cut immigration drastically, so there won't be this big exodus from the big cities out to your towns, and you can maintain the character of your small towns. This is one thing. And that's a positive thing as well. It's not attacking anyone. We want to maintain the character of the English town, the English village. Also, farming is an interesting one, and I'm going to go in August. I've got a supporter has sent me a list of agricultural shows across the country in August, and I'm going to go to some of them and put up a little For Britain stall, because a lot of farmers in this country are very angry about halal. And they want it, and I've met a few farmers over the past, since we started the party, and they uniformly tell me that they want this thing done away with, that they're disgusted by it. And the market is dominated by, it's like what you were describing, they don't feel able to talk about it. This is where we are. This is like, this is like a Soviet spy movie, isn't it? Where people are afraid to say what they think. I don't like this business practice, but I can't. Yeah.
When you talk about that, I wrote to Reading Borough Council probably 15 years ago because I had several parents come on to me about halal meat was being introduced across all the schools in Reading. And the reply I got from the Freedom of Information was that they couldn't supply me with the information because it was it's a hot potato. Basically, it was a political situation. Therefore, it didn't fall within the remit of the Freedom of Information, i.e., we're going to introduce halal meat. And that's the situation. But going back to your other point about immigration, it's not just immigration. 1928, the Muslim Brotherhood said we will defeat Europe with the wombs of our women. The birth rate amongst immigrants, Pakistanis, Somalis, all of these Muslims, is 5 times the indigenous population's birth rate. And that's going to be a big problem.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's argument number one as to why we shouldn't be having the immigration. I mean, it has to stop. It has to stop. The immigration has to stop. You have to cut off. You can do nothing about what's going on inside this country if the border is open. You can do nothing. You're wasting your time. So the border has to close first of all. Secondly, we need to start removing people. And here is how me personally, I'm not saying this should be party policy, that's up to the members, but how I personally would do, what I think needs to happen is, number one, the border has to close to a list of countries. We need to be clear. No more immigration from these countries, under any means. So what you'll find what's happening a lot with Pakistanis, for example, is that British-born Pakistani girls are being forcefully married to men in Pakistan who then get to bring the whole family over. This has to go. This has to go. So under no means shall there be any more immigration from, for example, Pakistan. Another one would be Somalia. Another one would be Saudi Arabia. There are a few. Point number one, no more immigration from these countries. At least, let's say 5 years. I will say forever, but let's say 5 years to be reasonable. Then we have to look at who's here. Let's look at who's here. So let's go into the 8 FGM clinics in London, find out who's in them, and start removing. I'm sorry, I know how this sounds, but start deporting FGM practicing people. You're not going to do anything about it. You're not going to be able to punish it. It's a way also, if they're not British citizens, if they are, you're in a different league. But if they are not British citizens and they have at least one child who has been subject to FGM, their other children are also at risk of it, I don't see why the British taxpayer needs to pay for this 7th century nonsense. We have to start sending people out of this country. I'm sorry, but it has to happen. And criminal offences like FGM or child marriage are a way to do that. It's a way. We must start deporting people for these crimes. There was a woman convicted a few days ago for forcefully marrying her 13-year-old daughter. I don't know what her sentence is. Has she been sentenced yet? I'm not sure she has been, actually. What it should be is deportation and exclusion for life. That is what it should be. Because we cannot have forcefully marrying our 13-year-old daughter. We won't have it in our civilised country. And we must show our disgust by deporting people for this crime. We must. Plus, it's a way of massively reducing the population, and we must end the benefits culture as well. At least we have to stop child maintenance after 2 children. 2 children per parent, not 2 children per woman. So 2 children per man. So if he has 5 wives and 25 children, he's going to pay for all but 2 of them himself. Watch how quickly the polygamous marriages come under control when you cut off the child maintenance for his 20-odd children. And don't think I'm exaggerating with that either. 20-odd children is not unusual, and all of them paid for by the British taxpayer with 3 or 4 polygamous wives. That has to stop. You have to hit people where it hurts, and money is where to hit them. Take away all the benefits, they will not be having all these children. Deport people convicted of these grotesque crimes. That is where a lot of people would rather be in a British prison for a couple of years than get sent back to their own country. This is what will do it. This is what we've tried the carrot. We've tried education. We've tried being nice. It just gets worse and worse and worse. It's now time for the stick.
Could I also say, though, I think it would be important to make the analogy between these people and the country, i.e. the country is a house. If you invite somebody into your house and that particular, one of the family members desecrates the house or whatever, you don't just get rid of that one person, you get rid of the entire family. And that would be my argument, is that once you've got a problem with one person, the whole family goes. Brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, nieces, the whole big urban family go, because they are guests in our house, i.e. the country, the UK. Thank you, goodbye.
Having said that, what if I wouldn't want to be punished for anything one of my family?
Absolutely. Do you know, I was just about to say that. That I don't know. I think you are punishing people for the crimes of somebody else.
You've got somebody who's assimilated.
We're trying to impose our idea of democracy onto people that neither want nor need it. That's the point, and that's where we've got to attack it.
It's interesting. You're right. It is a completely different way of living, a completely different way of thinking. Individuality doesn't really exist. It's all exactly. Well, yeah, that's the word, I guess. I don't think we could ever go down that road, though. But I don't think it's necessary. If we want to maintain if we want to maintain our way, our identity, we have to do things our way. It's true, and we don't as a rule. It's one of the things that makes us civilized, is that we don't punish the brother of someone who's done something wrong. It's one of the things that makes us civilized. But I don't think, having said that, that we should be going easy on people either. These things are not ours. These are not us. These cultural practices are not us, and that's a good enough reason for us to want rid of them. And it's a good enough reason for us also to say, look, you will live by our rules, or just don't live. We're a free country. You can live your own private life as you see fit, but you will live it in accordance with laws that we set down, that the majority sets down. And if you don't like it, don't live here. Now, we need to be really clear about that. It's not about hatred or anything like it. It's about saying, look, we decided that child marriage was wrong hundreds of years ago. Now, you're not going to bring it back. We don't want it to go. We have to say that. And we must impose our laws. We must. And if we did that, even if we did that just a few times, can you imagine the political signal that would be sent? The image of the UK would change completely. People would no longer be trying to get here by the truckload from Calais, I can tell you that. I can tell you that. You wouldn't necessarily have families from the Horn of Africa or anywhere else in Africa desperately trying to get here either. In fact, you may well get some people wanting to leave, and I suspect you would. But that's all it needs. We need to listen to the majority and say unashamedly, unapologetically, we're the majority on this, our say goes. And that has to happen with the halal and the kosher market. I get this a lot. Whenever I say we should ban halal, you'll always get some smart aleck coming back with, oh, what about kosher? Yeah, ban that too. But you're picking on a religious minority is usually this isn't about religious minorities. Some of us are a bit tired of having to cater to religious minorities the whole time. This is about the will of the majority, and the majority in this country wants religious slaughter banned. And this is about animal welfare, and we don't want unnecessary cruelty to farm animals. So if it's discriminating against a religious minority, well, I would suggest that that's their own affair, considering that they're the ones that have introduced this grotesque slaughter in the first place.
I was just wondering, what would be your stance on gun control?
I think it depends on where you are. I've probably changed on this. It's one of those where I'm back and forward and not fully committed to either side. The American debate is obviously very interesting. I have a few different opinions on this, really. I find the American gun culture quite intimidating. I don't particularly like it. I don't think the British are a gun people. I don't think we could ever sort of be that gun culture that America is. However, what I really admire about the gun ownership in America is that sense of self-sufficiency, that sense of self-defense. And given that I have been subject to threats for a few years, I have to tell you, I've changed a bit over the years on this. And I'll be honest, if I legally could, I'd probably have a gun in my house now. I probably would. And I feel that if someone was to come into my house, for whatever reason, if he presents any threat to me, that I ought to be able to do whatever is necessary at the time. You know, the law says you're supposed to keep it proportionate. You're supposed to respond with an equal force. That's the one not to go overboard, basically. I would say, no, I don't think that should be the law. I think the law should be whatever is necessary at the time to defend yourself, regardless of the level of force. So if you pick up a knife or a golf club or whatever it is and you happen to kill this person, I think there should be absolutely no punishment for you. They would not have died if they hadn't been there. So do I want to see a gun culture, a US-style gun culture in the UK? No, I don't think I do. Do I want to see a free country where people are allowed to own a gun? Yes, I do. And I've probably changed about that over the years. I have changed. But at the moment, yeah, I think I admire that idea that the Americans have of their right to bear arms so that they don't have to depend on the state to defend them. And if you look at the way the state defends us, it's becoming more and more relevant, isn't it, that we should be able to defend ourselves? Because
wouldn't put up with what we had to put up with.
Oh God! Well, let's see. They will be putting up with it soon.
It's quite a contradiction when you can't buy a gun, yet you don't need a background check to buy a car. You know what I mean?
I guess the gun debate in America is very, very messy anyway, isn't it? But I think, on balance, yes, we are free people. We should be allowed to own a gun. But more importantly than that, I think the ability to defend ourselves, and that notion that the American gun ownership is based on, and that the US Constitution is based on, is the notion that you should not depend on the state to protect your life and property. And I like that. So yeah, nowadays my opinion is we should be able to own a gun in our house. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, how are we going to combat the threat to freedom of speech in this country, especially online? What with Facebook and Twitter using companies like the SPLC, the American Defamation League. These are all Jew-run things. Not that I know that's a bit of a contentious point, but they seem to be, really extreme left-wing organisations that these media companies are using to rid social media of people like us.
Yeah. Social media is difficult because obviously they're private companies. I would say we can't do much to regulate people like Twitter. Because they are private companies, but it's funny how much the left-wing politics managed to get. It's not regulation, but it's funny how closely aligned and legislatively, philosophically, every which way, the media, including social media, is aligned with the left. So you've got a big problem to start with. I think the first step is to not rely on them too much. New human creativity will come up with something. The internet is still the best chance we've got, and you can see that people will come up with stuff. I mean, Twitter is cracking down really hard. So they've come up with Gab, and Gab is still relatively small. I have an account, but I don't use it, so it's partly I ought to do my bit. but that it'll happen, and as YouTube becomes more restricted, it places more restrictions. You see new video producers popping up. So the internet is an absolute it's perfect in many ways for our task to communicate with lots of people without having to go through a politically correct, government-aligned media. So we're very, very lucky to have it. What was your other question? I'm sorry.
Well, just what we can do to combat this, really, the restriction on freedom of speech.
Oh, right, okay, that was what I had in the back of my head, trying to remember. Politically speaking, I think it's time for a UK constitution.
Yes, I do.
I do. I think the problem we have with we do have a constitution, but it's not a codified constitution, not written. And I think we need one. And I think it's a positive thing to offer to the country, to offer to the electorate in the post-Brexit era. We've got a chance with the end of the EU, whichever, even if it's only a symbolic departure from the EU, it's still in many ways a chance for a fresh start. And I think a UK constitution is something that might go down very well with people as part of that fresh start. I'll come to you in a second. It should be based on the best of past and the best of present. We should enshrine, of course, freedom of speech within it. I would say Section 1, or whichever way we're going to organise it. Part 1, freedom of speech. No Parliament. We should a US-style constitution, not a US constitution, but a US-style one in terms of its supremacy. So the House of Commons can pass no law that contradicts with this, in the same way that the US Constitution works. And the reason we need that is because we have members of Parliament, transient, in and out members of Parliament, many of them careerists who'll do whatever they're told, most of them careerists who'll do whatever they're told. And they have the right, the legal ability to take away our freedom of speech. They have the right to take away pretty much anything, because there's no supreme law. In theory there is, but it would take a private individual to go back through, to get a lawyer, to go back through old legislation, to take, on what grounds would we be looking for a judicial review on a decision? How are we going to challenge this? It shouldn't be the way. Private people having to take, someone said to me a few days ago, if you know that girls have been gang raped and the police have done nothing, why don't you take out a private prosecution? I thought, why should I? But individuals shouldn't have to take out private prosecutions against gang rapes. Where are the police? We need to solve this as a country. And I think a UK constitution based on the Magna Carta, let's bring some British tradition into it, let's solidify our democracy. And in a way that the transient activists, careerist MPs can't destroy in 5 years in Parliament.
Do you think there's any mileage in people like me off the street and that, they see all this stuff going on, PC, politically correct stuff and what have you, in schools, in academia, and they don't seem to be able to link it all up. Is it worth trying to maybe simplify what's going on with cultural Marxism, which is where it all stems from? The poison that seems to be spreading. It's cultural Marxism, a lot of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There's this long march through the institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very interesting for people who are interested in politics. But I think for people who are not necessarily interested in politics, cultural Marxism probably. I think if you're more likely to get, and I'm speaking as a politician now, you're more likely to get through to people using everyday examples about the insanity of it all. And you can find plenty of them in schools, if we want to talk about the education system. But you're right, of course, Of course you're right, of course it's cultural Marxism. There's a load of ideologies acting out in Western society today. Yeah. A lot of them. It's like the Syrian war, there's like a mass of different things going on at the same time. Hi.
Hi. My question is pretty much about partly what inspired you to make this party and to run it and to start it, really. Before I'd heard of For Britain, I unfortunately had made a very pessimistic plan about my future, because not just future generations, but the generations that are alive now, I felt that if the future involved an Islamic State, that I personally falling into two sort of minorities that Muslims would consider very, very clear enemies. So for one, I'm gay, and two, I'm atheist. So if anyone is going to be killed, it would be me. So my question really is have you fallen into that minority yourself? Have you ever thought of that possibility? My plan, before I'd heard of For Britain, was to study another language, to save up and to immigrate, simply not because I was bailing ship, but because I felt that in the future, if things carried on as they were now, I would fear for my life and possibly my partner's life. And my worst fear was that in the far future, when we are little old ladies in a house trying to be happy, that's when it will happen, that's when they will come. And as I said to the lady here, there's nothing easier target than an old lady. So my question really is am I alone on that thinking, or is that something you've personally thought about and maybe inspired you more to fight back? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I do. I have thought about that. I'm very aware that we can't know what's going to happen. So any potential scenario is only that. It's only a potential scenario. But I do think that unless we change things are going to get very, very difficult in 2-3 decades' time. If we keep going as we are, things will be very difficult for gays, particularly. Things will be very difficult for women as well. We're already seeing that with the rape gangs and that's just going to get worse and worse, particularly across Europe. And I'm more optimistic about Britain's future than I am about the rest of Europe. What inspires it? It's so hard to. It's a question I really can't answer. It's just there, you know. I can't. I started off when I was a law student. I discovered Sharia law, and wish I hadn't. If I hadn't, my life would have been very different. Not that I don't like my life. I'm saying if I hadn't, my life would have been very different. But I'm glad in many ways that it's given me an opportunity to try and do something. You know, I guess I can't allow my brief little window on this earth to be about money or I get frustrated, I get infuriated, I get angry when I see things that are happening around me. And what makes me even more angry is how nothing is done about it. There's an indifference and a laziness and an incompetence that allows all this to happen. It's like when I talked about the £3 and a bit grand for a mouthwash, and people are sleeping on the streets for want of 50 quid, while all that money is... This is what makes me angry. It's the sheer injustice and incompetence, that suffering is also unnecessary. And I'm very anti-cruelty, which I'm sure most people would claim to be, but I don't, unnecessary cruelty to anything, to anyone makes me angry. And it is anger. And I think if you channel anger correctly, you can turn it into a positive. I think a lot of people are angry. And a lot of people let that anger, not through any, I'm not criticising those people, but for a lot of people, anger overtakes and becomes a negative. I am angry. I don't particularly like how the world is run. I don't particularly like how this country that I love with all my heart is run. And I got, I thought, right, you know what? I went to the Labour Party. I tried to get them to see sense. There was no way. It was impossible. I was young and naive. Then I went to UKIP, full of hope that this was UKIP will do it. UKIP will do it. No chance. Absolutely no chance. And I thought, you know what? If they won't do it, I will. And that was basically it. And I kind of thought, well, I'm sick of waiting for someone else. I'm sick of waiting for a party that reflects what I and millions of others think. So I thought, well, let's do it. Let's do it. A couple of days after the UKIP leadership election, I just thought, yeah, okay, made up my mind, let's do it. A lot of people wanted me to stay and fight for the leadership again. I will come back. Did you have a question?
No, that's right. I was just going to ask, isn't the Magna Carta of the Constitution already?
It is, it depends on how you're sort of defining constitution. In a descriptive kind of way, it is. It's notionally it's a constitution, that and several other pieces of legislation. But I think what we need is a codified, supreme constitution and a fresh start, because the Magna Carta is not being listened to. The Magna Carta may as well not exist as far as the politicians are concerned. So it needs a boost, but we must make sure it is based on the Magna, and that we say so. So we need to bring a bit of British history into the British future. By honouring the Magna Carta as the basis for the new British Constitution. Yeah.
I think they ignore it because it's too old.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to skirt around a legislation that's that old, but there is a convention where legislation which contradicts old legislation replaces it, sort of thing. But there are still fundamentals in the Magna Carta which should be applying, but are not. But like you say, I think the age is the problem. But we should revive it and bring it forward into a new pro-British Britain with a British constitution.
That's what I think.
Yeah, let's do that. Did you want to come back? Oh, hi, sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I just had a thought when you mentioned about cultural Marxism. And there's a man who's from Canada who's very famous, a man called Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
First of all, I was wondering if you're aware. And I kind of thought, because he's really causing a big stir about that, and really, especially to a lot of young people, about Marxism and the effects it has and stuff as well. And I was just wondering, first of all, just if you'd heard of him, but also if you'd be, consider sort of using the influence of people like that, but also get lots of famous YouTubers and stuff across the world, in America and stuff, who've got huge influence in this way, and are getting massive audiences because of the internet, and getting them sort of censored at the same time. And I don't know if you'd be able to make them play a part in getting people involved. So it's a very question because I think there are a lot of young people out there who are.
Yeah.
We do. I would. There's. I have no issue with that, and I've done a few interviews with various internet people over the years. I understand the people you're talking about. And I wouldn't object, but there is cause to be careful. I think when you're a party that's this young, trying to appeal to a mainstream British audience, you take the risk of being too closely aligned with other people's views, and that's just that's not a we shouldn't do it. That's a note of caution, and I would choose quite wisely. Who I would, they probably wouldn't. I mean, I'm not saying they're all clamouring at my door, they're not. But the Stefan Molinos and the Milos and Paul Joseph Watson, I assume that to you, that general people are who you mean. Yeah. You need to be. They are.
It's like you said.
You have to keep a safe.
Sunday, you can march and go on YouTube as much as you like. Until we've got somebody sat in Parliament, nothing's going to happen.
And for someone to get into Parliament, they have to be very careful. You've got to be. It's not about being PC. It's about playing. Politics is a game, and it's a dirty game, and you're not going to succeed unless you're going to play it. And let me just qualify that with a statement. Politics is a game, but some people are playing it for themselves. Other people are playing it for a cause. Either way, you're going to have to play it. And this is one of those. You don't want to become the politician, but if you're not willing to at least play the game, you're dead. So you do have to be very careful who you speak to. Yeah, absolutely. I would just, I would certainly, if you know of anyone, put them in touch.
Thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much
No,
for
not at all. Thank you.
your efforts on our behalf and starting the party and everything else. You put your head above the parapet. There's people in this room that can put their head above the parapet, and there's people who can't put their head above the parapet. What's your advice to those who can't?
Do what you can. There's always a way to help, whether you can go public or not. We have many people. I know many people over the years who don't go public, but who are actively involved. I've known people over the years who I don't know their name. I've known people for years and I don't know their name. That's how not public people are. Anything you can. If you can sit at home and answer emails, if you can sit at home and do web work, if you can, whatever it may be. Obviously, online is the obvious one. Doing online work. And by the way, we are looking for volunteers for our database, Nation Builder. If anyone knows it, let me know. And this is a good time. We're getting bigger, so we need more IT people. But it's difficult to find IT people, I find. Anyway. But yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. And we all have to do our own little bit. So you have a look at your own life. I would say don't take any massive unnecessary risks. Don't take, we can't always take these risks. There are people who do have to stand up. We do have to have a public face, but I certainly don't criticise people who won't go public. Do what you can. And if we all did what we can, we'd be in a good position. But we all have to do our bit. Tommy Robinson does his bit, I do my bit, you have people like Douglas Murray doing their bit, and it's all appealing to different, but you've all got to do your bit. And if you can't go public and all you can do is sit down and answer a few emails or something, then you're playing your part. And there's plenty to do. Okay, thank you all. I'm going to have to head off and get the train, but thank you all for coming.